In the late 1970s, BMW's M division was still in its infancy, but that didn't keep them from dreaming big. In 1978, they released the first vehicle completely in-house designed by the M division. It was so special, they called it the M1. And decades later, BMW ended up renaming the 1 Series the 2 Series, arguably so they could have a full-on M model, and they didn't want to call it an M1, so that became the M2. Now, decades after that original M1, we finally have the M division's second in-house designed vehicle, but it's nothing like the M1. I've been driving this XM for a week now, and I have to admit, I'm no closer to understanding it, because this is probably the most conflicted M car and the most conflicted BMW ever conceived. This is the most powerful BMW, producing 644 horsepower or 738 horsepower if you get the latest edition of the XM with the Redline package. But it's big. It's over 200 inches long, 201.2 to be specific. It's almost as big as a BMW X7. And that's because this is not just supposed to be the flagship of the M line. It's also one of BMW's flagships, and they were pretty upfront about that when they launched the vehicle. They say this is taking aim at vehicles like the Lamborghini Urus. That kind of makes sense. The G-Wagon AMG maybe makes a little bit less sense. And the Bentley Bentayga, perhaps even less sense. When you say M, I think performance. When you say Bentley, I think luxury. And the XM has a bit of both going on. Again, lots of power, but it also weighs 6,100 pounds. Yes, it's just under, but essentially 6,100 pounds. And unusually for an M, it has a plug, because this is a plug-in hybrid giving you 31 miles of all-electric range. But I don't know if I could describe it as efficient, because when the twin turbos kick in, you'll be getting 14 miles per gallon on average. The seating is sort of automotive mullet. It's sporty up front with these seats that really grip you. We have a great steering wheel with carbon fiber paddle shifters. But in the back, it's full-on luxury. There's very little bolstering going on back here. This rear bench is as flat as a sofa, and it even comes with these adorable little XM pillows standard. BMW even gives you a place to put the pillows. I suppose the comfy back seat sort of makes sense when you think of this as one of BMW's flagships, right up there with the X7 and the 7 Series. But as the flagship of the M Performance brand, it is a little bit weird since the X5 M is a bit quicker 0 to 60, stops a little bit shorter from 60 miles an hour thanks to its lighter curb weight, which also yields better handling and slightly better fuel efficiency than this XM. And it will cost you about $30,000 less. But perhaps more perplexing, I sort of understand where BMW was going with the XM, and I do think this is one of the finest engineering examples that we've ever seen from BMW, but that still doesn't make me less confused about it. So with that out of the way, let's just dive into more or less a normal review of the XM, and then let me know at the end what you think about this. Does it really have a place in the M lineup, or should BMW just focus on plug-in hybrid X5s and the X5M? BMW has been given a lot of crap for their buck-tooth design. We certainly find that in the iX and the 4 Series, but the XM goes in an entirely different direction, seemingly entirely designed by straight angles. We find the latest interpretation of BMW's kidney grille with a definite twist here in that it has a lighted oval and a very horizontal theme. Let me know what you think about the light pipe. I was a little bit torn about it in pictures. In person, I think it looks really great. I'm also impressed with how even the light pipe is, and I kind of wish this became the new BMW signature. It's as distinctive as the angel eye headlights that we found for quite some time. Speaking of the headlights, these are projection LED headlights in this lower section here. We then find the daytime running lamps and the turn signals in this upper section. No fog lights below, but we do have cornering lamps as part of those lamp modules. When the headlights are off, especially in this black paint, the entire front end looks kind of glossy, which really hides those headlights and gives it more of a cohesive look. There's lots of cooling going on, as you'd expect in the most powerful BMW model ever. Big cooling intakes right there and below, cooling ducts for the intercoolers down here on either side of that, and then over here we have some functional air vents that help relieve pressure up front and guide air around the vehicle. As you'd expect, there's a BMW logo up front, but most of the logos around the XM just say X and M. You may have already guessed it, but the XM is related to the X5 and the X7. It has the same 122.2-inch wheelbase as an X7, but it's just a hair shorter. This is still over 201 inches long. It's also about 200 pounds heavier than the heaviest BMW X7 because this is a plug-in hybrid standard and the X7 doesn't have that option, at least not at this time. Versus the X5, you'll notice that it is longer as far as the wheelbase goes and bigger in the back seat as well. But we have a bit more of a coupe-like roof profile, which does drop down cargo practicality a bit versus the X5. The other big difference versus the X5 and X7 is that we don't have an adaptive air suspension on board. BMW decided instead, or I should say the M division decided instead, to go with a regular steel spring suspension, adaptive dampers, four-wheel steering, and 48-volt active anti-roll bars. That certainly gives this a, shall we say, unique ride quality out on the road. I'll talk more about that in the drive section. The sinister lighting theme continues out back where we find full LED taillight modules with turn signals that fade on and off. Definitely a really slim theme to them. Big XM logo back here. And you'll notice that in the middle of the hatch, there's nothing. No BMW logo there. But in a nod to the M1, there is actually a BMW logo in the back, or I should say two. One etched into the glass on each side of this rear hatch glass. At the bottom of the bumper, it's all about the exhaust tips. The rest of the bumper just sort of frames them and bulges out to meet those quad exhaust tips. They're trapezoidal. The lower ones go more or less straight out, whereas these upper tips just project that sound really out for everybody to hear. BMW, of course, gives this an active exhaust system. If you have the loud mode on, then you get some additional cracks and burbles, but trust me, it's pretty loud in both modes. Let's take a listen. As you'd expect from the most powerful production BMW ever built, under the hood we find a technological tour de force. But what you might not expect is that this twin-turbo V8 is not the most powerful twin-turbo V8 BMW produces currently. This 4.4-liter engine produces 483 horsepower, 479 pound-feet of torque in its own right. That goes all the way up to 644 horsepower thanks to the addition of a 194 horsepower electric motor. That's also good for 207 pound-feet of torque in its own right. That sends power through to all four wheels via a standard 8-speed automatic transmission. And yes, the motor goes through that 8-speed automatic as well. So when it's operating in electric-only drive mode, you will occasionally feel the transmission shifting. Now, if you want even more power, they don't bump up the electric motor. They actually bump up the gasoline engine, and that will get you all the way up to 738 horsepower if you want the upcoming red label version of the XM. Everything is fed by a 25.7 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. We also get onboard rear axle torque vectoring and a 48-volt and high-voltage electrical system. So there's an awful lot going on under this hood. We still have a 12-volt system, a 48-volt system, and the high-volt system for the hybrid system. If you really like the looks of the XM, but you're looking for something a little bit more fuel efficient, a little bit less expensive, and a little bit less powerful, also if you live in Asia, you'll be able to get your hands on an XM50E, which uses a 3-liter inline-6 plus basically the same motor setup to give you 469 horsepower. At this point in time, BMW won't say whether or not the XM50E is going to come to the US. I wouldn't bet on it coming, but who knows? BMW will never say never. If you live in North America and you like the sound of the XM50E, you can get essentially the same drivetrain in the new X5 50E, the X5 plug-in hybrid, that will give you 40 miles of electric range versus 31 miles of electric range in the XM, and of course less power than you'll find in this model, but it does seem like a rational alternative. Speaking of charging, that happens behind door number 1 over here on the driver's side. There's an onboard 7.4 kilowatt charger that will get this completely full from empty in about 3.5 to 4 hours if you have access to 240 volt charging. If you're plugging this in just via a regular 120 volt outlet, it will take about 24 hours to completely charge the battery. This is one of the plug-in hybrids that logically should have a level 2 charge connector at home. However, you could still get maybe a 20 amp 240 volt EVSE that's going to be a lot cheaper to install, and you'd still be able to completely charge this battery overnight. Now, the range in this model is only rated for 31 miles EPA, but as we'll get to in the drive section, range has been shockingly impressive. Not quite as impressive as the X5, also not quite as efficient as the X5 plug-in hybrid, but pretty solid for what the XM is. These are some of BMW's most comfortable and most adjustable front seats. We find 4-way adjustable lumbar, power extending thigh cushion, inflatable side bolsters, adjustable seat back curvature, that's a really novel feature. We also, of course, get powered headrests, powered tilt telescopic and memory linked steering wheel, 2-position seat memory over there, and active front seat massage. But you should know that this seat massage is not as aggressive as what we find in most modern Mercedes models. This is more of an anti-fatigue type system. So there are air bladders in the seat bottom and seat back cushion that give you a slow, gentle massage, but mainly focus on improving blood circulation for those longer highway journeys. Hopping back into the lounge-like second row again, this is a very flat bench. You'll really notice that if you move over here to the middle seat position, it's almost imperceptibly higher off the ground than the outboard seating positions. The bigger thing you'll notice is it's just not as softly padded as the outboard seating positions. From this angle, you can definitely see the front seat's aggressive shoulder design. The back seats, again, more lounge-like. Thanks to having the same wheelbase as an X7, but just being a 2-row vehicle, we find notably more legroom in here than we find in the X5. It's really obvious, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks, and I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. If you were to buy a $160,000, $170,000 BMW and you needed to put rear-facing child seats behind an adult up front, should be no problem in here. The rear seats also have a very different vibe to them. The leather doesn't just coat the seat backs, it also curves around the side and then ends up over here on the door, kind of giving this a wraparound lounge seating sort of sofa vibe, kind of like a sectional sofa, if you will. We have lots of headroom back here and 2 cup holders, soft touch armrest. Headroom, actually that's one of the things you'll really notice about this. Since we don't have a moonroof in here, I'll get to that in just a moment, we have a few more inches of headroom than you find in the X5, so I actually have about 3 inches maybe of headroom there. If I move to the middle seat, again, not really higher off the ground than the outboard seating positions, but certainly more firm. The outboard seating positions are a little bit cushier. Still plenty of headroom here, maybe about 2 inches of headroom in the middle. And of course, these rear seats do recline and they flip forward. They fold almost completely flat with the cargo area in the back, but they're not quite as adjustable as I thought. I was kind of expecting power second row. I say that because one quick clarification, this is not a reclining second row, it is a folding second row. As far as the seat back angle, it just stays like that or folds forward. Behind this very vertical hatch, we find a more or less X5-sized cargo area. I say more or less because the numbers are a little bit difficult to divine based on the way that BMW sometimes measures their cargo capacity. I suspect that the just under 20 cubic foot number is below this little cargo divider right here because a lot of European car companies don't include the space above. And I say that because when you expand that out to behind the front seats, it ends up right about the same as the X5. I do find cargo practicality to be pretty decent because of this very vertical hatch. So by and large, if it fits in, the hatch should close. Now on the downside, we have one of these hard style cargo covers that latches into place. This provides a little bit more sound isolation than a roller style cargo cover, but I also kind of think this is a bit of lazy engineering because where are you going to put this when you actually need to put taller cargo back here? It is soft on the side, don't worry about that. But say for instance you wanted to put roller bags, say you're going to the airport and you need to put bags back here, they're going to be a little bit tricky with that cargo divider in place, and then if you take it out, there's nowhere to put it because there's no spare tire or any additional storage space under the floor. Battery has to live somewhere, and that is the somewhere. Interesting thing, BMW gives us kind of a really nice satchel for storing the EVSE that comes with the vehicle. Kind of looks like a high-end purse or something like that. In here we find a dual voltage EVSE, which is also another nice touch. So you spend $160,000 on your big new plug-in hybrid, you don't have to spend an extra couple $100 on a dual voltage EVSE for home use. You will of course have to wire it in. This comes with a 120 and a 240 volt plug, kind of a nice color matched gray, subtle color there. I do think that's a nice touch. The bag though, that is a little on the large side. Helping improve cargo practicality, BMW gives us a 40-20-40 folding rear seat. That's another touch that I really like. Without a doubt, the first thing you'll notice when you get inside is this very eccentric 3D headliner. It has lots of geometric shapes going on, and those are really accentuated by the way the ambient light strip integrates with those. The ambient lighting is adjustable. You can change its color and you can change its brightness. And it really shows off how 3D this headliner really is. The highs and lows are probably about 1.5 inches or so apart from one another. You'll really notice that the first thing you hop in, especially if you jump in at night, and so will everybody else that rides along with you. It occupies roughly the area that a panoramic sunroof would go, but we don't have one of those. That's especially obvious up front, where we find a cutout that looks decidedly panoramic moonroofy, although no moonroof controls, of course. As we see in a number of other BMW models, the shoulder belts are not height adjustable, but we do have two-way adjustable electric headrests. You can see the very aggressive shoulder section of these seats. Of course, they're leather upholstered. The seat bottom and back cushion are perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. You can see that extending thigh cushion right there, and the way their leather wraps up to the front doors, which definitely gives them a different vibe than the back doors, where again that leather upholstery wraps around and then to the door. As you'd expect from a flagship, the front doors and dashboard are almost entirely covered in stitched leather in this two-tone red and charcoal theme for this model. We have a Bowers & Wilkins audio system there with metal speaker grills, a very large storage compartment below that, and that wraps around to a dashboard that definitely gives me some X5 vibes, although it doesn't look exactly like the current X5, interestingly enough. We get the M logo there on the dashboard, pretty decently sized glove compartment inside there, where you will note that this model gets 14 miles per gallon, and as tested here, $167,395. That is definitely a hefty price tag. Moving over to the dashboard, we find the latest BMW iDrive system. Of course, it supports wireless smartphone integration, so we can move over there to Apple CarPlay, for instance. It has this large, almost single sheet of glass looking design right here on the dashboard, although obviously two different screens. One over here for the instrument cluster, one over there for the infotainment system. You can see the driver attention monitoring system blinking right there. We have two big air vents in the middle. I don't find these quite as easy to adjust as what we find in some other BMW models, but they're definitely very attractive looking. Some physical controls for the infotainment system down here, track forward, backward, volume controls. We then find a storage area where you can open and close the lid. That gives us a wireless charging mat. It is a little on the small side, I think, though. USB-A port right over there, heated and cooled cup holders in the middle. Pretty typical BMW M-style shifter here, so we push over that way for drive and then it lights up. Reverse is that way forward. Park is that button right there in the middle. And then this toggle changes the aggressiveness of the transmission shifts, which is kind of a unique BMW M theme. This definitely has a regular 8-speed automatic transmission though, not a dual clutch. Over here we have the typical controller for BMW's iDrive system. It is essentially the latest design. Over on this side we find a number of different vehicle controls, things like the stability and traction control, parking sensors, 360-degree camera button, and then these are all the drive mode controllers for the vehicle. Setup takes you over to this particular screen in the infotainment system where you can make lots of different changes to various features. The M Hybrid button takes you to a screen where you can select between hybrid, electric, and charge operation. We then have a button to open and close the exhaust flaps, auto brake hold, electric parking there, and then hill descent control, kind of interesting twist for a dedicated M vehicle. Pretty big center console storage area right there in the middle of everything. We also have a USB-C charge port inside. The instrument cluster software is pretty similar to other BMW models. This is the road view. You can also get a sport view to this display. Lots of information provided by this system. You can see the RPMs right there, but if I move this over to the electric mode, then that is replaced by an electric power gauge quite logically. If I'm in the hybrid mode, then you get basically one of each. You get a little electric display on the inside and then the tachometer on the outside. On the left side, we have our pretty typical trip computer readouts, but you can also get two-screen Apple CarPlay where the Apple mapping interface will be displayed on that left side of the screen, or if you're in the road mode, in the middle. The 3-spoke steering wheel isn't just nice to look at, it's also nice to hold. This is one of my favorite steering wheels. We have big paddle shifters on the back. These are carbon fiber paddles, and they have a carbon fiber face and a red back to give it a little bit of extra depth. And you can see the red kind of bleeds through with the plus and minus. We also have some little tiny M paddles on the front, M1 and M2. Those pull up different drive programs. Also a nice touch. Big sport grips up top there. You'll find the controls for the cruise control on the left side, and then on the right side we find the controls for the infotainment system. You can see that the shift paddles really are quite large. They extend down there and all the way up there, and they move with the steering wheel. That's certainly my preference. As you might expect, 0 to 60 times are going to depend on the mode that you're in. If I come to a complete stop and I were to romp on the throttle, but keep it under control, I could go 0 to 60 in 8 seconds in EV mode. And BMW does make it a little bit easier to stay in electric-only operation than some plug-in hybrids, as long as you select that mode from this selector, or you let the car default to electric mode as long as it has some battery charge to it. On the other hand, if I engage hybrid mode, this could be as quick as 3.8 seconds 0 to 60. That is a little bit quicker than BMW's quoted time for the XM, but not quite as fast as the BMW X5M. The nearly 6,100 pound curb weight is of course the reason this is not as quick 0 to 60 as the X5M. With me on board, this is well over 3 tons of vehicle. And that curb weight is quite logical because we have a relatively powerful V8 under the hood, standard 4-wheel drive, torque vectoring axle, big electric motor, big battery pack in the rear, and all of that weighs. And it's going to weigh about 6,100 pounds, of course. So don't think this is going to drive quite like an X5, but it is fun in its own right, especially if you value the plug-in hybrid nature combined with the power, because this is one of the few plug-in hybrids that will stay in electric-only operation on my entire commute. I can make it from the office, over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, and to home, and still have some battery power left. There are 2 things about that that really amazed me. The first one is that that's actually longer than the 31-mile electric range this is rated for, because my daily commute's a little bit longer than 31 miles, and there's that mountain pass there. The other thing that's interesting is that the power and performance in electric-only operation is perfectly acceptable. You can pass people on the highway. You can go over 80 miles an hour if you want to. You can drive on your favorite winding mountain road relatively spiritedly and not worry about consuming gas. Of course, if you push harder on the gas pedal, then the hybrid system is going to kick in, turn on the gasoline engine, and get you going with over 600 horsepower. So we definitely have some room there. The engagement of the engine, that does take a little bit more time than I would like, but that's just the way hybrid systems function. It does have to fire up a decently sized V8 engine. But on the other hand, I appreciate the fact that it started the engine, it ran for like 4 or 5 seconds, and then it turned off. It went right back to the electric-only operation. That is not something we see in all plug-in hybrids. Thanks to the close-coupled catalytic converters we find here, and of course BMW's choice when designing the software, this is going to try and heat the catalyst up as quickly as possible, and if it's already warm, it's going to turn the engine off pretty darn immediately to help reduce emissions and just get you back into that hybrid mode. Now, if you don't want that, obviously you could engage one of these sporty modes, like the M mode. I can click these little paddles and I can engage any of these sporty or drive modes pretty darn easily. It's going to ramp up the exhaust note, all of that stuff, and it's going to be very immediate in its power delivery. But even in the M Sport mode, the acceleration is not quite what you might think. In the aggressive sporty mode, acceleration is somewhat unusual. If I floor it, there's a moment of nothing, then we get so much torque out of that electric motor that it actually makes the rear tires chirp, and the launch is incredibly aggressive. It is really throw you back in the seat kind of unexpected aggressive. But then when you actually take a look at the number, the X5M is just a hair faster than this, about 1/10 of a second or so, and that's pretty universal. All the other outlets that have tested this and tested the X5M, they're pretty darn similar, but the X5 has just a very slight advantage thanks to its lighter curb weight. Curb weight aside, stopping distances are very impressive. 109 feet for this model. Even though the tires are a little bit wider on the X5M, you're not going to notice too much of a difference in the stopping distance. That seems to stop just a little bit shorter, but the difference is pretty negligible. You are, however, going to notice more of a difference when it comes to handling. And to be honest, for the most part, this is at the limits handling. You're not going to notice that on a road like this. You will notice that the XM feels heavy on a road like this for sure, but the turn-in is relatively nice. The steering, a little bit video game-ish. It definitely goes exactly where you point it. Sometimes a little bit too exactly where you point it in a way because of the sort of video game nature that rear-wheel steering gives you. This feels pretty tight on this kind of road surface and a little bit more impressive out on something smaller. On the other hand, thanks to the torque vectoring axle and really grippy tires, the XM is still fun to drive out on a winding section of road like this, even a tight winding road section, because of course we have that rear axle steering, we have the torque vectoring axle, the grippy tires, everything comes together to make this a lot of fun, but it's still not going to have the grip of an X5. Ride quality is not one of the XM's strong suits, and that's mainly because BMW swapped out the air suspension for a fairly firm steel spring suspension. It still has adaptive dampers, and it does have the disconnectable sway bars, but the result of everything together is somewhat unusual, if I'm honest. On this road surface where we have these larger imperfections, it does a good job soaking those up, but we also have this odd amount of body roll thanks to those disconnectable anti-sway bars, but all the small imperfections come through into the cabin. So bigger speed bumps, those don't come through, but every single other little pebble on the road surface most certainly does. Then we have the four-wheel steering. Everything in here, as a result, feels just a little bit unusual because this steers kind of like the rear end is swinging out on you. It does cut a really nice tight corner, but I wouldn't call the nature of this steering system, especially on a road surface like this, overly engaging necessarily. It definitely veers more towards the luxury side of the equation, which is a little bit at odds with the whole feeling every pebble on the road situation. On a paved road like this, the suspension tuning makes perhaps a little bit more sense, but you should know that if you're out on a concrete highway, those expansion joints are going to be pretty noticeable in the cabin. The other thing that's going to be noticeable, this cabin is a little bit louder than the X5, something that I hadn't really expected. I measured 70.5 decibels in here, which is about a decibel louder than the X5, and remember that the decibel scale is not linear, so that's a reasonable amount louder as far as cabin noise goes. When operating as an electric vehicle, this system is really quite impressive. Logical, because it's essentially the same plug-in hybrid system that we're going to find in the more mainstream X5 plug-in hybrid. I was able to get about 41 miles of combined range in our range estimates. That's driving around town, a little bit of highway loop, etc. That's definitely a solid showing. And again, one of the few plug-in hybrid systems that can actually get me home only on electricity. When operating as a regular hybrid, it's a little bit less impressive. About 15 miles per gallon is what we've been getting. I think that's aided by the fact that this can stay in electric-only operation downhill, regain a lot of that energy back into the battery on my downhill runs, and then use that for driving on the highway. So it kind of helps buoy the fuel economy up a little bit over the 14 mpg EPA rating. Clearly, if you're doing highway driving, you're going to want something more efficient if efficiency is of concern to you. The more important thing, though, I think for a lot of folks is that you could effectively, as long as you treated electricity as if it was free, get 65, 75, 80 even miles per gallon relatively easily on this on a daily basis, even if you're only charging on one way of your round-trip commute, which is something that I was definitely doing for a lot of this week. Since it was cloudy at home, I live off-grid, so I just didn't charge it at home, charged it only at the office. That reduced the amount of gasoline I was consuming by a solid 50% or more. Again, definitely an interesting thing if you don't want to visit the gas station very often, or you just hate filling up that regularly. It's not really going to save you that much money because, of course, you had to pay $165,000 for this thing to begin with, but if you are concerned about that, or if you want that laziness factor of being able to consume less gasoline, then I would say this actually fits the bill. And that's kind of why I'm going to give this an A when it comes to fuel economy, because for what it is pretty impressive. It is not an ultra efficient vehicle, but for a performance vehicle, fuel efficiency is pretty decent. If all that makes the XM sound even more conflicted than it did at the beginning of this video, then I would say you're exactly right. Before we go, I should talk about one more thing out on the road, and that is the faux engine noise. It operates when the engine's on to augment the V8 sound, but it also operates when the engine is off. So if I'm in this electric-only operation, I get kind of a vroom vroom when I push my foot on the accelerator pedal. That makes it a little bit difficult to tell exactly what mode the drivetrain is in, and it is a little weird too. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. Should they have just not had a noise, or should it have been a different noise when it's in electric mode? The XM is all kinds of confusing, and I don't think that the red label is necessarily going to fix that. The price tag, I suppose it depends on how you want to look at the XM. At $167,000 approximately, as you're seeing right here, it obviously is not fully loaded because that would be the over 700 horsepower model coming soon, but it is still relatively expensive as far as a BMW goes. On the other hand, it's not as expensive as its theoretical competition. You'll definitely pay more for the Lambo. You'll pay more for the Mercedes. You'll certainly pay more for the Bentley Bentayga. But this does not offer the same level of customization that you would get in a Bentley, so it might be an alternative, but it's not really a true competitor. The most confusing thing about this really is that sporty thing. If you were to not put an M badge on it and it was just some BMW, it might make more sense to me, and that's perhaps what makes my brain hurt. But if I stop thinking about the M part of it, then I actually kind of like the XM. Yes, I think the ride needs some work. I think it needs an adaptive air suspension system. But you put this exact drivetrain in a BMW X5 with the air suspension, that would be all kinds of fantastic. The plug-in hybrid sort of makes sense, even if you are looking at this from a semi-enthusiast standpoint. If you're a true enthusiast, you're probably not going to want the plug-in hybrid. Just get the X5 M competition. That's for you. This one, though, it does mean that you wouldn't use as much gasoline. In fact, on my driving cycle, I would fill up maybe once every 1,000 to 1,500 miles, but I would still have all that power available when I want it. I really, really like the fact that even when you engage the hybrid system by putting your foot a little further on the accelerator pedal so the gasoline engine starts, it goes back to electric-only operation pretty darn rapidly. And because it goes back to electric operation so rapidly, this actually ended up using less gasoline and less electricity in some driving situations versus our long-term Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. This also ends up being slightly more efficient in electric-only operation, which is another mind-blowing thing that I totally don't understand, but we verified time and time and time again. This is actually more efficient on electricity than that Mitsubishi. And that's part of why in our electric-only operation test, this actually went about 45 miles in electric-only operation driving around town. And on my 36-mile commute, where I go up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, this is one of the very few plug-in hybrids that actually stayed in electric-only operation the entire time. That is extraordinarily impressive. Now, if you're driving it at 80, 85 miles an hour, its fuel efficiency, that obviously is going to go down the tubes. And that is the other problem with this, of course, is that when operating as just a hybrid without plugging it in, the fuel economy is not great. It's 14 miles per gallon. But you will extend your stops between gas station visits. You theoretically would be able to access the carpool lane in certain states. And it's very impressive for what it is. It is a performance vehicle that can give you those really quick 0 to 60 times with certain compromises, but the ability to shift some of your consumption over to electricity. And BMW has said that they are moving towards electrification pretty rapidly. This is one of those moves, and it's sort of this rational mix of both worlds. You are certainly giving up things, however, in either world. If you want to go electric only, that would be the BMW iX. If you want gasoline only and the better performance and better feel, that would be the X5. The blending of these two worlds is the XM. So again, let me know what you think about that. I think my problem with the X is the M part. And if this didn't have an M on it and it was just the BMW X, I would be totally on board. I like the design, I like the inside, I wish it was softer tuned, love the amount of power, but yeah, I really still don't quite understand the XM. If you do, let me know down there. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and check out all the related content on the website, on the Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, X, all those things out there. I'll see all of you next week.